Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here. Um, Someone's internal architecture is collapsing under the weight of what they've been pretending they don't feel. And the rubble is forming a path that leads directly to your door. Um, I'm not talking about casual interest escalating. I'm not talking about someone finally getting bored enough to pay attention. What the cards are revealing reads like internal surrender, like a person who's been fighting their own knowing about where they belong. And that fight just became more exhausting than the vulnerability of admitting the truth. The oracle shows me walls crumbling, not the kind you tear down deliberately, the kind that erode from constant pressure until one day they just give, until resistance costs more than surrender, until staying away requires more energy than coming close. You were magnetized to this transmission because something in your field recognizes the frequency of someone else's barriers breaking down. The intelligence orchestrating synchronicity doesn't broadcast these particular readings unless the energetic signature of capitulation is already forming somewhere in your proximity. Steady your breathing right now, because what I'm channeling isn't the fairy tale version where someone realizes you're the one and everything becomes simple. What the cards show is messier than that, more human than that. Someone waking up to the reality that the chaos they've been tolerating elsewhere feels unbearable now that they've tasted what peace with you could feel like. The cards reveal exhaustion as catalyst, not the gentle kind, the kind that happens when you've been managing complexity that serves no one, maintaining dynamics that drain you, performing a version of life that looks acceptable from outside but feels like slow suffocation from inside. I'm receiving imagery of someone standing in a house that's on fire, not literally, metaphorically. The structure they've been living in, relationships, situations, patterns, it's burning. And they've been trying to save it, trying to put out flames, trying to convince themselves the smoke inhalation is manageable. But smoke eventually becomes unbearable. And what the cards suggest is that this person has reached their threshold. The thing they've been tolerating just became intolerable. And when that shift happens, people move. Your chest just responded to something reading that, didn't it? Let me decode what walking away from drama actually means in the context of what the cards show versus what projection wants it to mean. This person has been embedded in something complicated. The cards don't show me specifics that's not accessible, not mine to divine, but the energy reads like entanglement, multiple threads, multiple people, multiple obligations or histories or patterns that don't resolve cleanly. And for a while, they managed it. They compartmentalized. They told themselves that complicated is normal, that everyone deals with drama, that staying makes them loyal or responsible or mature. But the cards suggest something shifted their tolerance. Something made them look at the complexity they've been managing and suddenly see it clearly as unnecessary, as chosen, as something they could walk away from if they stopped telling themselves they can't. And you you're part of what shifted that perception. Not because you did anything to them, not because you manipulated or convinced or campaigned, because you exist as contrast, as evidence that life doesn't have to be this heavy. That connection doesn't have to be this exhausting. That home doesn't have to be a place you need to recover from. You showed them, probably without trying, probably just by being yourself, what simplicity feels like, what ease feels like, what it's like to be around someone who doesn't require constant emotional management. And once you've felt that, complicated becomes unbearable. For some of you, this person has been in a relationship that looks functional from outside but feels corrosive from inside. The cards suggest they've been staying for reasons that made sense at some point but don't make sense anymore. Obligation, history, fear of disruption, belief that leaving makes them the bad person. But those reasons are losing their power to keep them stationary. The cost of staying is finally exceeding the cost of leaving. And when that calculation flips, people move. For others, this person has been embedded in family drama, living situations, friendship dynamics, work environments that have been draining them slowly enough that they normalize the drain. But normalization doesn't make it sustainable. And they're reaching the point where their system is rejecting what they've been forcing it to metabolize. Drop a house emoji in the comments if something just clicked about why this person has been distant or inconsistent. Now, let me go deeper into what I just want to come over, live with you actually suggests versus what fantasy wants to project onto those words. This isn't necessarily literal relocation. The cards suggest what they're actually expressing, whether they've said it out loud yet or it's still forming in the space between thought and speech, is about energetic homecoming, about wanting to exist in the frequency that being near you creates, about craving the version of themselves that emerges when they're not performing for chaos. But here's the shadow the cards want exposed before you receive this. Someone running from something isn't the same as someone running to you. And if you don't understand that distinction, if you don't require them to understand that distinction, you become the refuge they use to avoid dealing with what they're running from. And refuges refuges eventually become prisons when the person sheltering there never does the work to address why they needed shelter in the first place. So the cards are warning. Yes, this person might express desire for proximity, for integration, for collapsing the distance between your lives, but desire isn't readiness. Expression isn't action, and even action isn't sustainability if they're moving from reaction rather than from healed choice. You need to discern whether they're choosing you or choosing escape from something else. Because if it's escape, you become the next complicated thing they'll eventually need to escape from when being with you stops feeling like relief and starts feeling like responsibility. Tell me in the comments if your throat just tightened around something you've been afraid to acknowledge. Let me reveal what the cards suggest about the mechanics of how this might unfold, keeping language probabilistic, because cards illuminate trajectories, they don't command outcomes. This person's movement toward you could happen in stages, not the clean, decisive kind where they show up one day with everything resolved, the messy kind where they test proximity before committing to it, where they express intention but struggle with execution, where old patterns pull them backward even as new desires pull them forward. The cards suggest possibility of intermittent closeness, moments where they show up fully, where the connection feels exactly like what you've been hoping for, followed by withdrawal when the reality of what full commitment requires becomes overwhelming. And in those moments of withdrawal, you're going to have to decide, am I willing to hold space for someone's process? Or am I requiring consistency as baseline for my participation? Both answers are valid. but only one protects you from becoming emotional support for someone who's using your stability to avoid building their own. Now, let me address what the cards reveal about your participation in this dynamic, because this isn't just about them and their choices. This is about you and what you're willing to accept. You've been waiting, maybe not consciously, maybe not admittedly, but some part of you has been holding space for this person to figure themselves out, to get clear, to choose you properly instead of choosing you as escape route from something else. And that waiting, the cards suggest it's been costing you. Not dramatically, not in ways you'd name as damage, but in subtle ways, in the opportunities you didn't fully explore because you were preserving emotional bandwidth for someone who might never use it. In the connections you kept at surface level, because depth with someone else felt like betrayal of the possibility with this person. That's the real question. How long are you willing to wait for someone to become available while your own availability remains in holding pattern? Because the cards suggest this person might express desire for closeness. They might even take steps toward it. But the timeline between expression and full embodiment could be longer than your patience. And you need to know your own threshold. You need to know the point at which waiting stops being faith and starts being self abandonment. I'm receiving imagery of someone standing at a door they won't fully open. They keep it cracked. They let you see glimpses of what's inside. They say they want you to come in, but they don't move the obstacles blocking the entrance. They don't actually create space for you to occupy. And you're standing there, waiting for the door to open wider, trying to decide if cracked is enough or if you deserve someone who flings it wide without you having to prove yourself worthy of full access. The cards don't answer that for you. They only show you the question exists and that avoiding it doesn't make it go away. For some of you, this person has already started communicating differently. The cards suggest shift in how they engage with you, more vulnerability, maybe, more admission of what they actually want versus what they've been pretending they want, more honesty about how they actually feel versus how they've been performing feeling. That shift is real. But shift in communication doesn't automatically translate to shift in circumstance. Someone can tell you everything you want to hear and still not be capable of doing what needs to be done to make those words material reality. So you need to watch behavior over time, not just in moments of emotional intensity where everyone becomes the most honest version of themselves, but in the boring middle, in the daily grind, in the moments where choosing you is inconvenient, uncomfortable, or requires them to have difficult conversations with other people in their life. That's where truth lives. Not in what someone says when they're overwhelmed by feeling, but in what they do when feeling subsides and choice remains. Comment, I see it if your body just confirms something your mind has been negotiating with. Let me reveal what the cards warn about specifically if you choose to receive this person's movement toward you without clear boundaries. First, you could become the emotional labor they're not doing for themselves. They come to you for peace, for stability, for the feeling of home. But they don't address the chaos they're bringing with them. They don't clean up the drama they're supposedly walking away from. They just bring it to your door and expect your presence to neutralize it. And for a while, maybe it does. Maybe being with you does calm them, does center them, does make them feel like they can handle what they couldn't handle before. But that's not sustainable because you're not a solution to their unprocessed trauma. You're not a band aid for wounds they refuse to properly treat. And eventually, the chaos catches up. It always does. And then you're not just dealing with your own life, you're managing the fallout of theirs. Second, you could mistake intensity for intimacy. The card suggests that this person's desire for closeness might feel overwhelming in its force. Like finally they're showing up the way you wanted them to. Like finally they're matching your investment. But intensity born from escape isn't the same as intimacy born from intention. And if you don't differentiate between the two, you'll build on foundation that feels solid but is actually just adrenaline and relief masquerading as connection. When the intensity fades, and the cards suggest it will fade once they're no longer running from immediate crisis, what's underneath? Is the connection still substantial? Or was the substance just the drama they were fleeing? Third, you could sacrifice your own boundaries to accommodate their transition. The cards show clearly that if this person does move toward you, that movement might come with requests for patience, for understanding, for time, for space to navigate their exit from whatever they're leaving. And those requests might sound reasonable, they might be reasonable, but reasonable requests can still cost you more than you can afford to give if you're not honest about your own capacity. You're allowed to have limits on how much chaos you're willing to hold space for while someone else figures themselves out. You are allowed to require that they handle their own mess instead of bringing it into your clean space. You're allowed to say no to being the person who makes their complicated transition easier at the expense of your own peace. Your jaw just clenched, didn't it? That's the part of you that wants to be the person who helps, who understands, who doesn't make demands. But helping someone shouldn't require you to harm yourself. And understanding someone's struggle doesn't obligate you to struggle alongside them. Now, let me address what could happen if this person does show up ready. Not escaping, not using you as band aid, but genuinely choosing you from healed, clear place. If that's what manifests, the cards suggest something rare, something most people spend lifetimes not finding, the kind of connection where home isn't a place, it's a person. Where peace isn't absence of challenge, it's presence of someone you don't have to perform for. But that version only exists if both people are doing their work, if both people are showing up whole instead of using the other to complete them. If both people understand that healthy love is two people with their own foundations choosing to build something together, not two people collapsing into each other to avoid standing alone. So, as we close this transmission, here's what the cards want you to sit with before this person's words become your reality. Someone might express desire for proximity, for integration, for choosing you over the chaos they've been managing. That expression could be real. The feeling behind it could be genuine. But expression isn't action. Desire isn't readiness. And even if they show up at your door, you get to decide whether you open it based on what they're bringing with them. Are they bringing resolution or are they bringing escape? Are they choosing you from clarity or are they choosing you from desperation? Are they ready to meet you as equal? Or are they looking for someone to fix what they haven't been willing to fix in themselves? Those questions matter more than the intensity of their desire. Those questions determine whether this becomes the connection that finally works or just another version of the pattern you've been trying to break. Your whole nervous system just said yes to something you've been avoiding naming, didn't it? Comment what you're recognizing right now that changes how you'll receive what might be coming. You were pulled to this reading because you needed clarity before emotion overwhelms discernment, because you needed reminder that you're allowed to have standards even when someone is finally giving you what you asked for, because you needed permission to require that the person choosing you has actually chosen themselves first. This person might walk away from their drama. The cards suggest that possibility exists, but them walking away from theirs doesn't automatically create healthy foundation for walking toward you. That's on them to build, and it's on you to require that they've built it before you let them all the way in. You deserve someone who chooses you from wholeness, not from depletion. Someone who brings peace, not someone who needs you to be peace for them. Hold that standard. Even when, especially when someone shows up looking like everything you wanted while carrying everything, you should avoid gratitude for receiving this with the discernment it requires. The movement might be real, your boundaries need to be realer. What happens next depends on whether you remember that someone wanting to come home to you doesn't obligate you to be home for them until they've proven they know how to be home for themselves. Stand in your knowing, require what you're worth, and let only what's truly aligned cross your threshold.